Va Ash Houston. Va was born in Cambodia in the town of Ta Keo, south of the capital, Phnom Penh. She had a comfortable upbringing with her 3 sisters and 2 brothers. In March 1970, Va was working as a teacher and living in Phnom Penh with her 2 young daughters, Somali and Panita, and her husband, Virak Phang, who was working for UNESCO in Paris when the country was plunged into uncertainty. Cambodia's communist-sympathizing ruler Prince Sihanouk was overthrown in a coup led by USA-backed General Lon Nol, who declared Cambodia a republic. The country was thrown into a devastating civil war between government forces and communist insurgents. The most powerful amongst these was the Khmer Rouge. On April 1975, Khmer Rouge entered Phnom Penh and seized control from government forces. This marked the beginning of the genocide in Cambodia. Key to the philosophy of the Khmer Rouge was the belief that Cambodia should start again with year 0, returning to an alleged golden age where the land was cultivated by peasants. Their aim was for the country to be ruled for and by the poorest in society. The Khmer Rouge wanted all Cambodians to be rural agricultural workers rather than educated city dwellers, which the regime perceived to be corporated by capitalist ideas. Professionals, such as lawyers, doctors, and teachers, were murdered along with their extended families. Some of the Khmer Rouge's victims were murdered simply for knowing a foreign language, wearing glasses, or even expressing emotion. Va recalls, the date, April 17, 1975, would stay in the minds of millions for years to come. It marked the beginning of almost 4 years of terror as the Khmer Rouge turned Cambodia into a vast concentration camp. The Khmer Rouge ordered Va and her family to leave the city for 3 hours only and carry nothing with them. 2 million people were forcibly evacuated out of Phnom Penh and onto the road. After walking for a month, the crowd, completely exhausted, stopped in the village of Bot Roka, where the Khmer Rouge started to integrate arriving city dwellers like Va and her family into rural life. They were set to work on collective farms immediately overseen by the Khmer Rouge. Young boys took care of cattle, whilst girls either cleaned out cattle pens and collected dung for use as fertilizer. Adult men and women were forced to carry out intensive physical labor, such as digging reservoirs and irrigation canals and harvesting crops. The conditions were terrible, with long hours, no or few breaks, and meagre food provisions. Va and her family were permanently hungry and weak from the labor. With disease rife and many dying of starvation, these collective farms became known as the killing fields. Over the course of the genocide, it is estimated that between 1 and 3 million people were murdered. There was the smell of rotting flesh everywhere, and some people's toes even dropped off. At night, we could hear people moaning and children screaming with pain. In addition to forced labor, the Khmer Rouge also sought to control and demoralize the population through weekly meetings known as Korsang, during which workers were publicly humiliated and forced to confess to crimes and faults. Furthermore, every day they were forced to sit through brainwashing sessions to be indoctrinated with the Khmer Rouge's extreme and violent ideology. The Khmer Rouge regularly forced crowds to relocate to different villages in order to prevent upsprings. Va's family was transported to the village of Thamapuak, near the border with Thailand. Upon arrival, they were placed with a family of 4 living in a tiny home. They slept on the floor before waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning to resume the back-breaking labor. After 2 months, a rumor spread in the village that the Khmer Rouge were looking for educated persons and previously military personnel to send to Phnom Srok, the district town, for re-education. Over the coming weeks, the village chief visited all the houses, asking people about their life under the Lon Nol regime. Knowing that her past as a teacher put her and her family at risk, Va told them that she was a street vendor. However, the village chief found out that Va's brother, An, had been a soldier under the Lon Nol regime, and he was taken away. We never really had a chance to say a proper goodbye to him, Va recalls. We simply came back one day and he was gone. Still under the watchful eye of the Khmer Rouge, the family had no opportunity to grieve their lost relative and continued work as agricultural slave labourers. In 1978, they heard rumours that the Vietnamese army had invaded Cambodia and was fighting against the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge placed further pressure on workers and to speed up the harvest, with people often working in the fields past midnight. Va heard artillery fire distance as she harvested. Once Vietnamese soldiers arrived in Thama Pauk, the Khmer Rouge fled into the mountains. Va and her family, along with 100 villagers, left on foot to the Thai border. The journey was dangerous, with landmines strewn across the jungle. When they got closer to the border, the Thai police picked them up and took them to a refugee camp. Due to the efforts of several relief workers, Va and her daughters, Somali and Panita, were eventually accepted for resettlement in the United Kingdom. In 1981, Va learned in a letter from a friend that her husband, Virak Phuang, had flown back to Phnom Penh in early 1976 with several hundred Khmer intellectuals. The group was told that the communists could use their skills to rebuild the country, but they were imprisoned upon arrival in Phnom Penh. Virak died in prison later that year. Va settled into life in the UK with her children and had another son, Peter, in April 1984. She now lives in Surrey with her husband, David. Her book about life under the Khmer Rouge, From Phnom Penh to Paradise, was published in 1988.